Some questions of my own, but I'm going to let you ask yours. If you'll look up at the board, particularly Mr. Okrent, as we've gotten heavier, we've also lightened your name.
I trade my weight to the Y.
So you'd like to buy a vowel?
See, the internet is self-correcting.
Well, I want to thank our three guests for a wonderful introduction about the topic tonight. I would assume you have a whole mess of questions, particularly because so many of you in our class are such avid users of the internet, as well as apparently avid users of print media and the news through the internet. So I will, without even asking one question, open this up to you. Back over here in the middle.
Thank you, all of you, for coming in. It's been really interesting. My dad's worked for the Hartford Courant for a while now, I think about 15 years or so. And the one thing that he's been complaining about for quite a while is the fact that the paper is owned by the Tribune Company, which also owns the Chicago Tribune, LA Times, I think the Baltimore Sun, too. So I guess my question is, well, going along with that, I've also heard that smaller papers, smaller local papers, are actually doing reasonably well still. So I guess my question is, on one hand, is my dad right? Is the Chicago Tribune the problem? Is local ownership desirable? And a little bit deeper than that, what do the larger papers have to learn from the smaller local papers?
I'll take a crack at it. If you want to know whether local ownership is better than chain ownership, ask the Taylor family. Which is to say that all newspapers were once locally owned, and the locally owned family decided they would rather have the money they could get from selling it to the New York Times or to the Tribune Company. That was exactly what happened in Hartford. I don't think, in fact, there's a disadvantage that local ownership has, which is to say that they cannot combine efforts as readily with chain ownership. So as the Tribune Corporation, whom I consider to be monsters, I'm not making a case for them, as the Tribune Corporation has cut radically across the board in all of their newspapers, they're down to one Washington bureau. But they can share a Washington bureau. If the Courant were independently owned, the likelihood of that would be, it wouldn't be likely at all. On the local papers issue, that's absolutely right. The trouble is at the big metro papers. That's the biggest problem. The national newspapers, for reasons some of which I addressed and some of which are obvious, are in a better position than the metros. And the smaller towns, I mean, if you own a newspaper in a town of 20,000 people, you're the only advertising medium that's there. Craigslist does not have a East Podunk department in it. And the wish for hyper-local news is strong enough that they, relatively speaking, are not doing that. I don't know what the metros can learn from them other than to move out of Boston into a small town.
Well, we see that one of the things the metros are trying to learn from them is how to get more hyper-local. I mean, we're doing it, we have this Our Towns thing online and everything, where we're trying to get more and more and more local, and I think that's an effort to learn the lessons of smaller papers. But, whether it really translates to a paper like the Globe or the Courant, is still open to question.
Yeah. I think local ownership, goes both ways. It's not a panacea. It's not the answer to everything. I mean, not every family is as, civically committed as the Taylor family was to this community. And some local owners might actually be a problem because, as the editorial page editor, I was concerned when the Times put the paper up for sale that some new local owner might sashay in and say, start dictating editorial policy or to help his friends, or, here, please, publish this article by my, my golf buddy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get sometimes a little bit of benign neglect from a corporate owner, gives you a little bit more independence and freedom. So that can really work both ways. It depends on the individual. I do think that media consolidation generally is a problem. owners do get farther and farther away from the, people who are doing the work on the ground. And sometimes you get a situation like with, the dude who bought the LA Times, I'm forgetting his name, who was the Cheerios magnate.
That didn't buy it. You got to see Mark Willis.
Thank you. Who was not in the business at all. I mean, he wasn't even a journalist or a media person. He was into, he made cereal, General Mills, right? So when you get that far away from the product, then it becomes a problem. So it really does depend on the individual. And the Hartford Courant's a good paper, and I wish it did well.
Also, one other thing, which is, I think the Tribune Company is kind of a mess if you look at their stewardship of the papers they bought in the last few years. And when you look at, not to get too deep in the weeds of this, but the flagship purchase of Knight Ridder a few years ago, which was also a disaster, you really wonder what the future is with big chains. It feels in a way like big chains are over. Local ownership is really where the business is going.
Another question? John, there we go.
Yes, I think we can agree that there are still many great United States newspapers. The question has to do with payment for online content. And the question is, if only one paper decides to charge for online content, can it survive? Or must all U.S. papers do that?
I was talking about this, I was just speaking to somebody else in the audience about this just a minute ago. Newspapers are all going through the same problem, and they're all having the same conversations with their editors. And in my exalted position at the Boston Globe, I used to go to these, endless, awful vice presidents, meetings where we would try to puzzle this stuff out, the business model question. It's broken, and what's the new one, and how about charging online? The problem is that nobody wants to go first. The New York Times, stuck its toe into this business, several years ago with the Times Select. You could pay $50 and you would get the Columnist, but if you didn't pay, you wouldn't get it unless you subscribed to the print paper as well. And they abandoned this experiment, even though it was bringing in quite a bit of revenue, because they decided to make a different bet. I mean, maybe Dan knows this better than I, having worked there, but I understand that they tried to make a different bet, which was a bet to get as many eyeballs as possible onto the internet website, and then they could sell ads against that. That didn't seem to work either. So anyway, the problem is that nobody wants to go first. I think that newspaper owners have to stop being worried about antitrust violations and get together and decide how much it's going to cost and set the price point and all jump at the same time and just do it. Because every day that we wait to charge people for content online, we're losing revenue and the whole, we're just hollowing out the journalism.
The model that I like to look at, the issue, as people in the business stated, is we've been giving it away for 15 years. How do we start charging for it? Which streetwalkers might have said as well. But the model I look at even more than streetwalkers is television, which those of us at a certain age, 1947. Television's beginning to reach its modern form with four networks at the time, and this continues for more than 30 years. And then along comes something called HBO. But television's free. No, not if it's HBO. They gave something that the television networks did not give, which is why I do think that high-quality journalism, at least on the national scale, it's a different issue locally, on a national scale, if you can only get the New York Times by paying for it, maybe 80% of the people will stop, the other 20% will say, I want my HBO. And once you've established that with some newspapers, then others will be able to follow. I think that the industry is not likely to dare the antitrust laws, especially with a real Justice Department for the first time in years. But I do think that once the Times goes, and I think the Times will go in the next several months in one fashion or another, then others will try it as well.
Hello, good evening, thank you for coming. I just have a few questions about, first of all, from what I understood from your three speeches, one consistent tone that I saw or that I felt was that all three of you almost seem apologetic about the current state of the industry. and how the business model has failed. And it's a bit surprising because all three of you also say that you don't know where the future is going. And it's scary to think that three captains of industry don't know where the business model is going. So,
I'd say three corporals of industry.
and so I mean, you guys are also looking at other industries and see where they've gone. And you mentioned, of course, HBO and cable, and the rise of cable, and then also the rise of the iPod and Steve Jobs. But I think it's quite clear, this is my question, why is it that there's so much ambiguity about what the business model is going to be? I think it's clear that paying for something online is extremely hard for anything, not only news. Anything is very difficult. It's very difficult to pay for anything online. Advertising is a good way to go, but it's the medium that's important. It's not the fact that music went online that was important for digital music. It's the fact that the iPod came out. So for you guys, I guess the question is, what format, what medium are you guys looking to? And I know all three of you fear no ink and no paper, but it's going to happen. So where's the medium of what you guys prefer?
Well, let me say first of all that I don't fear no ink and no paper. I don't think it really matters. I mean,
Nor do I.
if the Boston Globe 5 or 7 years from now or less than that is Boston.com, it's fine with me. I don't think it makes any difference. And I think where it's going clearly, at least in some intermediate phase, is toward people paying online. I actually think people will pay to read the paper online, or whatever it is we want to call it, if it's not going to be on paper. But I don't fear the change of medium at all.
I mean, all of us are on the content side, and we're too busy making the journalism, really, to worry about how it was going to get paid for. I mean, that was somebody else's, not to say it's not my job, but, it was the business side that was responsible for that. I was in these meetings, but, believe me, I'd be saying, what does this have to do with the First Amendment? And I was not, my opinions were not really that, deeply taken on the business side. I would just repeat something that I said earlier, which is that it's expensive to do quality journalism. And that's the problem. The problem is not, whether it's online or it's in a Kindle or whatever, you got to get a lot of revenue in order to be able to dedicate 5 reporters for an entire year to work on one story. And nobody's going to buy advertising on a story about priest child abuse. You know what I mean? People will buy advertising against a restaurant review or movies or, sports and stuff like that. But, the stuff that's really the sort of public interest journalism is the stuff that's the least profitable and the least interesting to people. It's controversial. People don't want to be sponsoring it, really. It's the most difficult thing to fund. So that's the problem.
Yeah, I think that all three of us really are not fearful of the changing medium. Where's the money going to come from? I'm feeling pretty confident about it. And one of the things that I'm confident about is that we won't be dependent upon advertising. That if you take out the physical cost of the newspaper, maybe the subscriber, the reader cost, the reader revenue will cover the cost of that newsroom. In terms of the device, the Kindle is like a stone tablet with a chisel. And next year it's going to move to papyrus, and the year after. The speed of technology is so extraordinary. I mean, the analogy that I use, in 1964, my father, who had a small 3-man law firm, got a desktop calculator. It performed 4 functions. It was the size of the Manhattan telephone directory, and it cost $400 in 1964, which is about $3,000 today. And now that same thing, it's the size of a credit card, and a physicist can do real calculations with it, and they give them away for all practical purposes. We're going to see things in the next 3 or 4 years that will be dazzling, even to people who say, I don't want to read on a computer, I want to read a newspaper. People aren't going to read it unless it's comfortable to be read with. It just, the thing that's in the way right now is battery power. Once they have portable battery power that can last a full day, you're going to see devices that will knock your socks off.
Just to remind you, this is an iPhone. There were about 100,000 applications that I could download on this. There's a number of them that are totally free. There's a whole bunch of them, tens of thousands of them that actually cost anywhere from 99 cents to I saw one for $99.99 actually. And in fact, you can download things on this machine and do it. I also actually have iTunes on this, and for 99 cents, I can download things. The wonderful thing about the technology is, Dan Okrent was just saying, is that you can charge fractions of a cent for things and make it work. And that makes it possible for people to buy the news they want in the quantity.
Yeah, the model that I think we're going to see from the Times is going to be a micropayment model. The first one that they're going to have, where you can pay by the article or by batches of articles, and it will be 3 cents to read an article, or 9 cents, or whatever it might be.
Another question? And then we'll come over to this side of the room.
Thank you. I'm struck how all of you argue persuasively for the importance of local news, local investigative reporting. But as a casual daily reader of the Boston Globe, my impression is that a significant portion of what I'm reading, a significant portion of the newsprint is devoted to non-local news, national, international news, national business and international business. So I wonder what percentage of your professional labor costs and what percentage of print-oriented costs should be allocated to the stuff that you think, the New York Times could do just as well. And if that's significant, then why not consider distributing, I'm talking about the print edition, distribute the print edition of the Globe as a basically local insert into the New York Times, and not replicate what the New York Times already does quite well.
Well, I think that you're already, I'll start this one, you're already seeing it's moving in that direction. The Globe has no more foreign bureaus. It has no more domestic bureaus other than Washington. I believe the Washington Post just closed all their domestic bureaus. Time Magazine had 55 bureaus in 1969, has 8 bureaus worldwide now. They're recognizing that news is going to have to come from somebody else. So what is it that we can do locally? And let's put the remaining resources we have into that. And I think that that's absolutely the direction. And I suspect the Times has got 2 experiments going right now in Chicago and San Francisco where they're doing local inserts into the national edition in those cities. And if the Times didn't own the Globe, they would do that here. If they did that here, however, they might put the Globe really out of business. They're not ready for that.
You ask a very good question. It's very provocative for those of us who work for the Globe, because, especially those of us who remember a time when the Globe had ambitions that were much broader and grander than they are now. We had foreign bureaus, and of course the industry was very different at that time. Partly, having newspapers with a very broad broad series of articles and interests and bureaus, this kind of thing in Washington and foreign bureaus was a recruiting tool to get really high quality journalists to work for the Globe, as opposed to all wanting to go to the New York Times. If you come to work for the Globe, you're ambitious, hotshot young journalist, and you think someday I might be able to go to London, or someday I can go to Washington, cover the White House, you're more likely to come work for the Globe than you would if you were going to go work for the Watertown Press, right? Because you just didn't have that career path. I think we're still sort of operating on that model, and maybe, sad truth is that, that's changed so much now. Most of our national and foreign, not so much national, but most of our foreign reporting is wire service now. Maybe we're hanging on to, an image of ourselves that's not entirely accurate, to this day. But I know that for many years, that sort of career path and that ambition to be a great newspaper with lots of national and foreign reporting and bureaus and journalists was a part of our identity.
Yeah, I think we've already done a lot of work coming to terms with this in the process of closing the foreign bureaus and closing the national bureaus other than Washington and all that stuff. What the final frontier is sort of this idea of becoming an insert. And the reason people don't want to do that is because it means a complete loss of your identity. And I think, for reasons that are maybe hard to articulate off the top of my head, nobody's really in favor of that. But I actually think that, in terms of the idea that you're going to go to the Globe and, maybe someday you'll come to London or something, I think we've already come to terms with the idea that that kind of career path is not going to be viable.
Question over here.
Hello.
Aaron?
I want to hear your thoughts on the nonprofit option, and maybe Paul Grogan might speak to this as well.
We're already a nonprofit.
Some of the pros and particularly con arguments from
Yeah.
the journalist's point of view specifically, but I would be interested in a foundation perspective as to how they think about running such ventures.
Well, I think for the most part, foundations still are frightened by the turmoil and uncertainty afflicting the whole industry. So just converting to a nonprofit, maybe it's marginally helpful, perhaps, but it doesn't really get at the kind of fundamental problems that are still being worked out. And it would take, first of all, I think very, very large foundations to take on the risk of being the owner of a paper. So now there are other nonprofit options being tried, obviously, ProPublica and others, where certain special journalistic enterprises are being funded by philanthropists, and I think it's another thing that'll be interesting to watch, but it's far too early to draw any conclusion.
A few points. One, actually, tell me if I'm wrong about this. Foundations like to put money into new things and don't like to operate things over a period of years. So what's going to happen after the foundation has done the seed money is one issue. There are two existing models, Publica being one that I'd like to comment on. One is the St. Petersburg Times has been owned by a foundation for many, many years. Their editorial staff, their new staff is now half of what it was 3 years ago because they're suffering exactly the same way that everyone else is. ProPublica, for those of you who don't know it, is a not-for-profit founded by Paul Steiger, who was the executive editor of the Wall Street Journal, first-rate journalist, who's brought a great deal of really top-notch talent around him to do investigative reporting on a national scale and then distributing their content through a variety of other media, ranging from 60 Minutes to daily newspapers. ProPublica was founded by Herb and Marion Sandler. For those who don't know their names, they were the people behind Golden West Financial. They brought us the mortgage crisis, and I haven't seen ProPublica do anything about the mortgage crisis yet.
Another question over here.
This kind of refers to some of the things that people have talked about the music industry and the technology. A while back when Apple struck a deal with the music industry to kind of legitimize buying music online, I heard a program on UMB once where they said the biggest mistake that the music industry did was by not asking for a cut of iPod sales. So it didn't go both ways. So iPod sales went through the roof, and the music industry was left in the cold with cents per dollar. Is there an equivalent that you see with some of the Kindles and some of the technology, or even the online providers themselves, where there might be an opportunity, like the cable model, really, where there's a pay-to-play, where there's a reciprocal relationship where the vehicle that's providing the news might chip in?
I think that's it. I think that you landed on the big one. Time Incorporated right now has 4 experiments going with 4 different manufacturers of devices. One's working with Apple, one's working with somebody. If you go online to sportsillustrated.com, si.com, they unveiled it today, the one they're going to use for all 4. And it is a partnership between the manufacturer of the device and the magazine company. The next step is that device will be given to you the way that your phone company gives you something in exchange for a contract. If you agree to buy my magazines and my music and my movies, which Time Warner does all of those things, for 2 years, you're going to buy $500 worth of stuff, we'll give you a device and you can use it for anything you want. I think it's happening.
Over here.
Newspapers.
No, you need it. Recording.
Newspapers work because of reporters. And my question is, given what's going on, are you seeing a smaller group of people affect who's coming in to do the work that you have been doing? Are we losing out on a next generation folks to do the shoe leather stuff?
I'm really surprised to say that no, I don't think we really are. I was talking to a journalism class at Boston College a couple months ago. There were like 25 senior journalism students, and I said, why are you majoring in journalism? Haven't you heard that this is a dying industry? You know, this is like going into making shoes or something. But they don't feel that way. They feel that, first of all, they're still excited about what journalists do. That's the important thing. And that there will be a role for them in one form or another. So I'm excited to say that I don't see that at all.
Steve Burgard is the dean of our school of journalism. If we don't have any journalists, he loses his job.
Let me just say a couple of words here. First, Dan Okrent's remarks really about the future of journalism have us wondering about our population. But I do want to point out Aaron Lester up at the top of the room because he actually asked one of the questions. He is a graduate student in Professor Walter Robinson's investigative reporting class here at Northeastern. And one of the models that is a side model to this idea of nonprofits and foundations is the role of the university itself as a partner in accountability journalism as we go forward. So this startup operation, a couple of years now, we have published a lot of page one stories in the Globe. We are talking to some foundations around the country that are specializing in journalism. Some of them are interested in being partners with universities in good journalism going forward. And I think the most important question to answer is these other young folks who are excited about a lot of this online stuff and video blogging and the Daily Show. I got to tell you, is a big hit with my students. They love it. They think it is sassy, and they believe it cuts to the chase and gets to the heart of things. So there is a lot of excitement out there.
My hope is predicated on what I had said earlier about barrier to entry. Instead of the journalism schools training somebody to go work for the Boston Globe or the New York Times, they're training somebody to go work for him or herself. And that's what we'll see. And there will be not jobs, but self-entrepreneurial opportunities, I think.
Yes, hello. Thank you, everybody, for coming regarding the news industry. My question is regarding conservative newspapers or progressive newspapers and the type of staffing they have in the general business model, business competition. If you're not able to compete, you're not able to perform, then you're not going to be able to survive in the marketplace. So